Lakmahal was built by my grandparents in 1937 when, after a distinguished career in the civil service out in the provinces, he was posted to Colombo. But sadly he died 8 years after they moved into the house. And my grandmother, who was just 44 at the time, lived on for another 49 years as a widow. She had 3 sons, but it was her daughter who stayed on with her in the house. And my uncles told my father when he married my mother that now my grandmother was his responsibility. And it was a responsibility he undertook with affection. Though of course the bulk of the work in the house was really my mother's, who was a magnificent, strong personality. But she sadly died just 2.5 years after my grandmother did. So that my grandmother had lived in this house for, let us say, 60 years, no, a bit less, 57 or whatever. My mother, who was 11 when she came in, died 60 years later. But my father, who had moved in 1948, stayed on. He survived my mother for 17 years, and he had been here 66 years when he died in 2014. And now I have been here longer than any of them. For having been born here, I am now 70 years old, which is a pretty long stint in one house. The house was a wonderful large house set in a large garden when my grandfather built it. It is no longer that. Sometime in the 80s, my eldest uncle came and asked my grandmother to give him a share of the property. And I'm not sure whether I think he asked for the front garden. And so we lost it. But we did not lose it immediately, for his granddaughter to whom he gave it was very good about not doing anything until after my father too had died. So my father had this wonderful large house with this large garden, and he much enjoyed having this space in which to function. He was a great entertainer. But then, when he died, he had a life interest, the house, but my mother had actually divided it up. For my elder brother also came and asked my mother for a portion of the land, but she very sensibly gave him a bit at the back, and the main house was given to my sister and me. But after a couple of years, we decided that this really wasn't working, because we had very different ideas about decorations, about gardens and all that. So we divided the house. And we decided, my niece asked me, did I want the up or the down? I said, let's divide it down the middle. So this particular room was an extension of a large drawing room. And I'm glad that I took one picture of that drawing room, which shows how magnificent it was. And there were pillars in between, cutting off this small section, and the piano used to be on this side. But we built a partition across the columns in the middle. So now I have only this small drawing room, but it's perfectly enough for me. And fortunately, my sister and I just divided the furniture very amicably. She said she didn't like ebony, so I've got the ebony furniture, and she's got the Biedermeier stuff that was the main drawing room, which is more modern, which she likes. So this is really, to my mind, the grandest room in the house. Not very grand compared with what we had, but it's a beautiful space, and I don't entertain on a greater level as my parents did or my grandparents, so it's perfectly adequate. But of course I had to throw out a door into the garden, and that's ahead of me, because there were just 3 large windows there near the piano. The main door from the drawing room is now in the section that went to my sister, leading to a large round balcony. But this little section of garden I have has given me enormous pleasure over the 6 years since the house was divided. Of course, there was a lot of little bits of building, as it were, which had to be done so that both my sister and I could have very comfortable areas. I was lucky enough to have kept the staircase, because I have the back portion of the house, and there's a magnificent staircase in the hallway, and that is now mine. But that meant my sister had to build a new staircase, which she has done, through the front lounge of the house, which is upstairs, a beautiful three-cornered room where we would sit most evenings, and where my father spent a lot of his last few years sitting at a desk or in the armchair that he so loved. But then I had to build several bathrooms. Two of them were in the space of the back, which went to my brother. But I built very large bathrooms at a right angle to where the earlier ones had been, and they helped to enclose the garden, while I also built a round balcony, because I had lost a round balcony, which went to my sister. And I did it through what I think is a rather fun construction, because outside this drawing room, I had to have a porch so that one didn't step out into what might have been rain. And then above it, I built a room with a little rounded edge, which I used for my exercise room. But through that, I had a little stairway going up to a round balcony, which is bliss. Because as I said, I lost the round balcony on the other side. But on this balcony, I have ponds with lotuses and lots of fish, and roses in 4 separate beds. And they have all done very well. There have been mishaps, but there were angelfish born in the bigger pond, which currently has a couple of lotuses there, white lotuses and another bud that will soon blossom. There's a smaller pond which had single white lotuses. The big pond has double white lotuses, and lots of luscious roses of different colors. But then I got carried away, or perhaps I got even more carried away than usual, because having much enjoyed my balcony for 4 years, I thought, why not have a roof garden? So on top of the bigger tank where the white double lotuses are, I built a spiral, an iron staircase, which leads to a slab on top of the stairway leading up to the balcony. And there I have 2 big basins and several smaller beds with a temple flower tree, which has the most magnificent flowers when it does flower. It's only done so in profusion twice, but that's been enough in the last 6 months. And up there are heaps and heaps of roses. And of course the views from there are magnificent, and you can look round to all the gardens below. Though the only sad thing is that the front garden, which as I said went to my eldest uncle and which his granddaughter sold, after 6 years in which nothing happened, and we had the lawn, and we had the lovely tree that my uncle had planted, the uncle who died young, so my grandmother would once a year go and look at it and the flowers and remember him. All that's gone to a rather horrid square structure. But still, you know, I have the sunsets. Although there are lots of buildings around us, you can see the red of the sky. And I have the sunrise, which can be absolutely magnificent on that side. And when there's no one awake and it comes over and hits my rose plants, I have a wonderful time. Early morning I go up to feed the fish, and it's the nicest time of the day, though I have more fish to feed because feeding them in the garden is equally pleasant. The garden down below is also an enormous joy. I'm afraid the grass there, which I planted so carefully way back in 1918 after the partition of the house had been completed, has been torn up by 2 little puppies I've got. But the rest of the features are still there. There are now several bathtubs there, one from the old yellow bathroom downstairs, and one from the pink bathroom upstairs. And there are 2 others which a friend gave me. But I also have a big pond which has a waterfall, which is lovely to see and to listen to. a small upright tank, which is a wonderful kaleidoscope of fish, a big pond built round a dead temple flower tree, and another smaller pond, which was really for a tortoise that was brought to me injured, and which I then discovered was really a sort of turtle, so he needed water. And again, it's enormous fun to feed the different fish in the different ponds every morning, and to see a few of them spawn. The gouramis once did, and whitefish that I'm told are called malawi did. Not quite as thrilling as it was when the angels spawned up in the pond above, but it was fun. And I planted a few trees. Way back in 1918, I planted a margosa tree, which has now shot up and is much higher even than my roof garden, from which I can see it. And then a jack tree just behind it, which was small when the garden first started, has also shot up, and the two compete. But the pride and joy of the garden is an ahala tree, which has the most fabulous yellow blossoms once or twice a year. And, in May, it is such a joy to sit anywhere in the garden, on the two designer seats that I've put up just by the porch entrance, on the swing that my father had put up when there was little boys staying here, and which I moved so that from there I can see the angles and right into this room, but also the angles of the ahala tree and the shrubs behind it. And now, most recently, a bench which sits just near what I call the temple flower tree for pond. There was also another dead tree when we started, a mango tree, and my sister and I decided to build a wall round that, the wall that divided our two sections of the garden. But very sadly, the mango wood is not so good, and it decayed. It lasted for 4 years, but then it died away and we had to remove it because the stump was rotting. But when the wall was built, my workmen painted the shape of the mango tree that had been there with the little bits of black that looked like bowls, so we can think of the old mango tree. And although the biggest temple flower tree on the premises, it was big when we were small and tried to climb it, has gone to my sister. It's so high that I can see it from this garden and also from my balcony, where it provides this fabulous backdrop to the roses. Nature I loved, and next to nature, art. I've mentioned my fish and my flowers, and let me move now on to the decorations that I have placed in the house, and I suspect I love art even more. It has been wonderful to be able to put up whatever I wanted anywhere in the house. This wonderful airy room used to be my grandfather's study and then my grandmother's, but it also had a big bed which was used by my uncle, and since he was a bishop we used to think of it as the bishop's room. And there was a lovely place to read in of an afternoon when it was full of light. I had a very dark little bedroom myself. My gran was a bit wary of ordinary mortals sleeping on the bishop's bed. But after my grandmother died, more than 10 years after my bishop uncle died, because he died tragically young, my mother decided to make this into our dining room. It was a wonderfully airy space with windows looking out on the back and the big mango trees behind it. And then when I had to make do with, as it were, half the house, I decided I wanted a three-sided room like the lounge at the front of the house that I had loved sitting in and which had gone to my sister. So I built here behind me a three-sided study with windows onto the back and the trees there, with windows onto the driveway and the trees there. And then another window which looks out onto a rounded balcony on this side of the house, because there was a very narrow balcony here behind the bishop's room, and I threw it open with a door that went in there and a door on this side into this new study, and bricked up the wall in between. And the balcony, which is the counterpart of the study behind me, was thrown out so that it's at the very limits of my property and looks out over the mango trees and then over the back. So it's a wonderfully airy space that I have here, in contrast to my grandmother's bedroom, which I now use, which is on the other side of this and overlooks the garden downstairs, to which one enters through the leftover bit of the drawing room in which I was sitting earlier. This dining room has the greatest range of pictures because it has a few of my collages. It has a splendid picture by Nalini Jayasuriya, the artist who was a friend of the family. It's got some pictures that I brought back from Mexico many, many years ago and gave to my mother, and there are 3 of them here. It's also got some old pictures that my parents much cherished, including what I always thought was a picture of Christ, but in fact is of Apollo approaching Vulcan's forge, which was by Velázquez, as I discovered when I was in the Prado some years back. It also has a sampler given to my father on his 90th birthday. So it's a great collection of different stuff. And it has this glass cupboard, which I always loved. It was at the foot of the stairs. And when my sister and I divided up the furniture, we each got the cupboards we wanted. And this I used to keep my own books. And then behind me in the study, there's a desk. And one of the smaller bits of ebony furniture, because I thought I needed one of those here. And opposite me, a table with deities of different religions, which is also something I have in the library. So it really is a wonderful place not only to sit, to look around, but to remember much of the past. And here we're in my study, where I have spent much time day after day. Less now after I contracted corona, so I cannot sit at my desk all day. But I work every morning. And it's just magnificent to look straight ahead of me at what used to be the edge of the balcony, looking down over the quarters at the back and the mango tree just behind, which is so beautiful. But I've got some creepers over the partitions, and they're lovely. And then at an angle there's another mango tree, and of course the new building I've put up, while behind me there's a mango tree over the driveway. And then on my right, as I sit at my desk, is the window that looks out on the balcony, and there are bougainvilleas there. So when I get up, I can see that wonderful range of purple in there. But behind me is, well, my favorite batik of my Aunt Ina, an owl, which is one of those I bought many years ago, but only had framed and put up recently, like a couple in the dining room. And then there's what is perhaps the best thing I ever framed. There was a shawl that looked as if it was about to come to pieces, which had belonged to my grandmother. And my sister and I found this when we were going over the house after my father died. And she said, you know, it's so torn, we might as well throw it. And I said, no, I'm going to frame it. And the carpenter, I had a lovely carpenter who did up the abacuses downstairs and frames all these. He managed to frame it beautifully. And it is a magnificent contrast to everything else in the house. And I'm reminded of it, by it, of a line in Paul Scott's book, The Towers of Silence, in which Barbie Batchelor talks of butterflies caught up in a maze. And I think of my grandmother, who really dominated this house right through my childhood, widowed at 44. And, you know, she lived a very full life, I think, even though her 3 sons died before her. So that despite being brought up in a time when, you know, girls didn't do much, she was lucky in her husband. And I am lucky that both of them built this house and that my mother and father maintained it so well over the years. And now, as I said, only half of it, but I think the more fun half is mine, to relax in, to work in, and to remember my own past, my travels, and all my family who did so much to make my life so comfortable now.